Hi there, students, and welcome back to Modern World History, where today we're going to be looking at North American colonization. So we've talked about Portugal, we've talked about the Spanish, we've talked about the conquering of different empires in the Americas by the conquistadors, and we talked about some of the cultural legacy of the Spanish and Portuguese being in the Americas, with the Spanish language and Catholic Christianity, and Portuguese being the primary language in Brazil, and all these different things. So what we want to do today is we want to look a little bit more closely at North American colonization, because now we're going to start getting involved with other countries other than just Spain and Portugal. So obviously we're not going to see where we're going to stop with two countries in Europe. Everyone wants to get on this bandwagon. Now that there's been some discoveries, everyone's like, wow, there's a heck of a lot about the planet we don't know. And so this curiosity, this Renaissance curiosity, is going to start being applied by everyone. And you've got these explorations being commissioned by monarchs, sponsoring all sorts of different explorers that we're going to look at. So the goal of these, what people who colonized North America primarily were trying to do, still, is they were trying to find a direct path through the Americas, and into Asia, because they were still like, I mean, you know, people know what they know. They knew that Asia had just a bunch of spices and things that they could get wealthy on, and so they continually wanted to get access to that, and they just didn't know what the Americas had. So there were many attempts to find a route through the Americas into the into Asia, and eventually many of these attempts obviously are going to lead to the establishment of colonies, and other countries like the British in particular are going to discover new ways of creating colonies as a means of getting as much gold and wealth as they can. So let's look at France first. Sailing for France were several individuals here. Verrazano found the New York harbor, so these guys were kind of in the northern portion of our country. Cartier was looking for, he discovered Montreal and the St. Lawrence River, and Champlain ends up discovering Quebec. Now, one quick tidbit about Quebec is that even today, and some of y'all may have had geography classes, even today, Quebec is more culturally French than not, okay? So they speak French, and are culturally French. So we think about Canada, the United States, being kind of a legacy of the British, but Quebec, which is the province in Canada, is certainly French, going back to this time period. So the French also claimed Louisiana and the Mississippi. Any kind of reference, really, you think about Louisiana, you think about the culture there. There's a lot of French in that. It's also more of somewhat of a distinct culture there, but nevertheless, you can definitely see the elements of French. Okay, so New France would have been what they called their colony here, the French colony. It was very sparsely populated. I can't believe I don't have a map here, but New France was more or less the central part of the Americas, from the Great Lakes down to New Orleans, really, in Louisiana. So emptying into the Gulf. That right there would have been the area that was called New France, and it was very sparsely populated. They didn't really try to put a lot of people in that area there, but what they did do is they used their colony as a way of managing fur and the obtaining fur that they were able to trade with other countries. So they established a pretty lucrative fur trade in North America. The English, their first colony was called Jamestown. It was in Virginia, and it was, as you can see here, a major fail. They didn't prepare very well. They didn't have any. They didn't prepare for the spring harvest or for the winter, and they basically had no crops, and they all died, or they were all killed, or whatever it might be. No one survived in the original colony of Jamestown, but things are going to get better for the British. They're going to be successful at establishing colonies later on, as time goes on. And so Plymouth, let's talk about this. We've all done the Thanksgiving thing in elementary school, where you got your pilgrims and Indians and all this kind of stuff. Plymouth was founded by Puritans seeking religious freedom from the Anglican Church. So remember, when we looked at the Reformation, we looked at how the church in England had undergone many different transformations depending on who the monarch was, starting with Henry VIII. And so you've got people trying to find a way of being able to worship as they see fit, and this is where Plymouth would have come from. These Puritans, they were going there. And you got the whole Thanksgiving story. You guys can watch Charlie Brown to get more on that. The Dutch, one of the explorers that they sent out was named Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson discovered the Hudson Bay, the Hudson River, and the Hudson Strait. All right, so looking at the area around there in New England, the Dutch West India Company also emerged as a company that was kind of and these trading companies were really their own thing, but they're also kind of were sponsored by the crown as well. But nevertheless, the Dutch West India Company colonized New Netherland. All right, and so I do actually, I was beginning to worry about myself. I do have a map that shows all these territories right here. And so you can see the French territory, as I mentioned. This here is more or less the Great Lakes to the Gulf. New Orleans would have been right there. The British colonies, the Dutch would have been around this area here. They're not on my map. All right, so the Dutch didn't last long. They were ousted by the British, which is the reason why they're not on my map. And the British ends up colonizing the entire Atlantic coast. All right, and so here's where, if you look at these British colonies here on the map, this here is the original 13 colonies we always talk about in U.S. history that became the first 13 states. Okay, so next, the British also ends up clashing. There's going to be competition over here as the British and the French clashed with one another over territory disputes. Now, the British wanted to expand westward, and they disputed the Ohio Valley region. You can see my arrows here are kind of showing this. And this is going to lead to an altercation known as the French and Indian War in the Americas. But this was really just an extension, if you will, of the 7 Years' War, which was raging on in Europe at the time. So the French and Indian War would have been the North American chapter of the greater conflict known as the 7 Years' War. So the French kind of teamed up with some of the Native Americans here in this area that didn't like the British. They thought the British were too harsh, or they'd prefer to have anyone but the British here in their territory. Didn't want the British to expand further westward. And they teamed up with the French, and as I mentioned, this was part of a larger altercation known as the 7 Years' War. The British are going to come out on top here. They're going to win this war, but this is going to take just a huge amount of revenue, a huge amount of just resources for the British to win, which is going to lead to the taxation that brought the American colonies to revolution against the British, which led to the establishment of our great country. So more on this later to come, and we're going to talk a little bit more about maybe not so much the American Revolution, but the impact of these government changes and how they led to revolutions across the earth in the next chapter. For now, we're on to Asian exploration. Thank you very much. See you next time.